Three, two, one. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the What's That Major podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Vanessa, and today I am joined by Bahram Badi. Bahram has a bachelor's in architecture from the USC School of Architecture and a master's in architecture also from the USC School of Architecture. Bahram is currently a principal and director of design and an adjunct professor for a variety of STEM classes at Los Angeles Valley College and Los Angeles Mission College. So I like to call him Professor. So, Professor, how are you?
Great. How about you? It's a
I'm
pleasure to be with you here.
Pleasure to be with you as well. I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. So, before we get into anything, what is the study of architecture?
The study of architecture really hinges on three major area. One is the design, the sort of the creative process to bring together spaces in a meaningful way and be able to create something that is better than ordinary, better than something that can happen usual, or you can make a very extraordinary, difficult situation into a very simple one. So
Mm-hmm.
that is really the design and the process of the design. The second portion or the second part of this is the technology and the technology where art of construction is, where you're dealing with structural issues, where you're dealing with civil engineering issues, dealing with HVAC, heating, mechanical, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, plumbing, electrical. So you get an overall view of the technical side because the design is like the flesh and the skin and the muscle and everything that you see on a body. The structural, mechanical, plumbing, electrical, all of those are like the lungs and the heart and the digestive system and all of that stuff that is inside the body. Then the third part is the history and the theory of the design where you observe how this field has grown to become what it is today. Because since the ancient time, we have been looking for shelter, and shelter has been the first primary element of design for a human being. So from that point on, we look at all the advances that were made in terms of what happened, how this thing came to being, where the material of construction was, and it's not just knowing the building and the history of it; it's knowing how it came about.
Mm-hmm.
As major buildings came to existence by many social and economical factors. So all of that plays a major role in understanding the history of architecture and the theory of architecture.
Yeah. How or when did you finally understand that this was the right path for you to pursue?
I was basically, I love drawings and painting. I mean, since I even didn't have any training for it, but since I was a little kid, I was drawing and painting, and I was drawing the stuff that usually you find sometimes outside you see, but sometimes I would draw stuff out of imagination.
Mm-hmm.
So all that sort of led to everyone was saying, well, you have this particular talent and you need to really hone it so it becomes your future. And then at very around 14 and 15 years old, I would realize that if I go to architecture, then I have been able to access all the things that I enjoy, all the things that I like to know
Mm-hmm.
on art, on history, because that was another area of my tremendous interest
Yeah.
was history. All of that sort of led to architecture. It's a very all encompassing field.
Mm-hmm. So I see your first school that you went to was Tehran University, and if I remember correctly, that's in Iran, right?
Yes, it is. Yes.
So when you went into that school, how or what was the demand like for the architecture major? Was it very aggressive? Was it smooth going, or how was it going into that major?
Almost universally, when the architecture school and the training in it is quite rigorous. And at the time that I was going to the first year of the architecture school was 1977, and the demand was high. Iran was on the progress and construction mode of expansion and everything else. So there was tremendous amount of demand for architects. There was a lot to be built in the country. And then, of course, 1978, followed by 1979, it was the revolution,
Hmm.
which basically disrupted a lot of stuff. Everything went on hold, and change in the regime took place, and then after that, I left. But at the time that I went in, there was a tremendous amount of demand.
Yeah, that I found that very interesting. Because you only went from 77 to 78, and
Yes.
and then after that, that's when, all the protests started happening. Um, when What was the culture like back then in the school?
The culture was good. The culture, when you say culture, what are you exactly referring to? Is it like the thinking process, political views, all of that?
Yeah, kind of a little bit of everything. How were people thinking? How um what was the atmosphere like within the school?
It's a very good question because it sort of brings back a focus into an era that is has been very important. I think with all the events that has come after that, it's an interesting overview of what was going on at the time. Um, School of Architecture and Fine Arts, which was the school that I went to, was a very forward-looking school, and most of our professors at the time either had been graduated from Sorbonne in Paris or London School of Architecture, University of London, and Italy, Florence, and Rome. So we had tremendous number of incredibly gifted professors that not only were teaching, but also they were practicing. And therefore, they brought a tremendous amount of information and experience into the field. In terms of students, uh, that was the time and the ripe age typically that happens where you have students take a political side. So we had almost three different groups at the time, which was very prominent. One group, which was, I would say, majority of the students were basically taking no sides. They were just there to study, and they would not make any political views. Even if they had a political view, they kept it to themselves. I was one of them. And then we had two other distinct groups, a group that was more toward the religious understanding and religious ideas, which was the Islamists at the time. And then another group that was highly toward the left, which was basically the Marxist group at the time. So there was always, some level of uh, discussion between these groups, and then sometimes that becomes a heated discussion. Sometimes, due to demonstrations inside the college or inside the university, you would hear one group and the other group, and therefore that was the atmosphere at the time when we went in. It wasn't until the summer, which was really the university at the time got closed. I mean, it was a summer, holiday. Summer, there was no classes in the university. It was during the summertime that the amount of the demonstrations start piling up. And then when it came September, this is September of 1978, pretty much the university did not open due to all of the demonstrations and a lot of violence that were taking place in the street.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Wow.
was that environment at the time.
Yeah. So coming out of Tehran University, I see that you went to St. Edward's University right after that, correct?
Yes, yes,
So, and that is in Austin, Texas. So
yes.
I'm very curious to know what was that like? I assume it was kind of a culture shock, no?
It's really interesting because one is that you really have to, and language, English language, I had familiarity with because we get educated on it in the high school. But for a fact, you can never learn a language until you are in the place that people speak,
Mm-hmm.
because there is so many expressions and so many forms of communication that you need to learn. So that was a task by itself, which takes your attention completely away from everything else. Your ears are sharp enough to hear all the expressions and things that happen so you can absorb them and learn it.
Yeah.
The other side of it was that very fascinating to me. When I came to Austin, I came in with a couple of my friends who were also applying to go to college. At the time, I was also applying, but yeah, as you know, application for universities takes a while to
Yeah.
be processed, especially at the time for foreign students. And so it was almost, I would say, maybe 9 months to a year before I can enroll at USC. So at the meantime, I went to St. Edward College, and Austin has also University of Texas at Austin. So Austin is basically, at the time I was there, was a college town.
Mm-hmm.
And of course now it's totally different. It's a huge metropolis, you know. But at the time it was really a small college town, and I came across some really wonderful people. I really did, and that was one of the interesting parts of the whole conversation, and the fact that you come across, people were tremendously nice. It's really interesting because I was, at the time, I was coming out of Iran, and there was a lot of uh, anti-American slogans on the streets at the time, and the issues had come up on the surface in the media and everything else. But that sort of did not really impacted the day-to-day, even though there might have been. I mean, I have no doubt there has been some people who got into fights and all sorts of stuff. But as far as I was concerned, I came across very nice group of people all the time in the college, as the instructors, as the advisors, especially in St. Edward. And then, in the daily life, the same. It was very, very fun to be there. Even though, so that, just coming across, and, you're trying to learn the language, you're trying to master it as much as you can, plus all other stuff you have to do. So it takes your attention away from bad things, if it, even if it's there. That I'm sure there are there, and there was there some, but
Yeah.
compared to priorities, it goes away very quickly.
Yeah. So, and I've spoken with people who do travel from different parts of the world. I've spoken with someone who came from Canada and decided to educate themselves within the UC system.
Yes.
And you decided to go to USC, which is a private university. So I was wondering why USC caught your attention for architecture.
USC was and is still the top 10 architecture schools in the country and also in the world. In The education in USC was tremendously rigorous, and the opening for people was basically being, they usually looked at your portfolio. That was one thing. You had to prepare a portfolio with your work, and then of course, the grades and everything else. The one of the best part about it was that at the time my sister was also living at Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a very major, opportunity for me to be with a family member, and then at the same time being able to go to school. If it's expensive, as you know, but thank God, for the parents who paid for the tuition and bailed me out basically. But otherwise, it would have been impossible. God bless them, for doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I'm thankful in that way too. I'm able to go to either a CSU or a UC because my dad is a veteran. He fought in the Iraq War, and
Yes,
thankfully because he was a veteran, I'm able to get my tuition paid for. So
wonderful.
I'm definitely, if it's free, I'm definitely gonna capitalize on it as much as I can.
Absolutely, because it's a tight. When you're a student, it's a tight living, as you know. All of us who have been through it, and I was in a comfortable family, but I was not a silver spoon in my mouth, basically, born. So any help that can give you is a tight living, tight budget, and of course, at the time, the cost of living was much lower than it is today. I remember I had a Toyota 1972, and I used to fill it up, and that would last me the whole week to go back and forth to the college and come back.
Yeah.
Hamburger was $1.
Wow.
It was a much cheaper living, cost wise. But
Yeah.
yeah, any help that comes, it really pushes to your benefit and your health.
Hmm. So, I try and ask a lot of people this as much as possible because a lot of college students and a lot of high school students who have a job, they're very comfortable with that job, being that their money comes in every week. I remember when I had my minimum wage job, it would come in every Thursday. So there's this instant gratification that some people get for having fast money. It's there all the time.
Yeah.
But I also want to bring out the importance of having a degree. How did your way of living differ from when you were with your parents to now that you had a degree?
Having a degree is your prerequisite to get a job in this field. You can get a job while you're going to the architecture school, but having a degree will assure you to put you into the right track to progress. So I started from just being a simple draftsman, which is basically a typical entry level job in architectural offices. At the time, everything was drafting in manual. So it wasn't, so I was trained in drafting manually with ink and pencil and all of that good stuff, which was really creates artwork. It's
Yeah.
beautiful work. And today we have, of course, the CAD and all of that. That's another advantage for all of us in doing so. Um, Having a degree puts you into a right track to progress, which means you go from drafting person. After having a degree and have some 2 3 years of experience, you become a job captain. And then the job captain, in 2 3 years after that, you become a project architect. And then after that, 2 3 more years, you become a project manager. That will not be possible. And I mean, it is possible based on your experience of over 15, 16 years if you have done it. But with a degree, that is the natural progress for you. And of course, the money that comes from it, the salary that you get, whether you're on a salary basis or you're on an hourly rate. Usually, the early jobs, early positions are on hourly rate. And later on, since your salary rises, you become a salary base, which means, some weeks you have 40 hours worth of work, some weeks you have 60 hours worth of work, some other weeks you have 30 hours worth of work. So it sort of balances out. But you get the same amount of money on your paycheck. That paycheck allowed to do a lot of stuff. Paid some of the debts, pay some of the, get a new car, at least that you have a reliable transportation, and then you can build up. You can build up your life and your saving through that. And you have to be very smart about it because the business of architecture and construction goes up and down by the economy. And, as we always say among us as the architects, we always say the business is either a famine or a feast. You have either too many stuff that you can't even handle, or you have nothing to handle. But so you have to balance out your revenue and everything else from it.
Yeah. So coming back to when you were at USC, so you got not only your bachelor's, but you got your master's there as
Yes,
well. I'm curious to
yes.
know why you decided to stay and get your master's there instead of going to a different university.
One of the reasons that I went to math, there were two, three reasons behind it. One is that many times when you graduate, you get your bachelor degree and you leave the university, you will never go back to get your master, because you go out, you start working, your priorities changes, and getting a master takes a backseat. Even if it will be somehow somewhere out the car, as they say, you get to it. That was one. We had a professor that was tremendously helpful to us, and he encouraged me and a friend of mine, whom at the time we were going to college, to university together, to architecture school, to stay and get the master. That was for the same reason that he was saying, that I know a lot of students will never come back. Go ahead and get it, and get it out of the way. The third reason was that after finishing our bachelor, they awarded us a scholarship, and that cut the tuition to half
Oh
for
wow.
us. Yes, and at the same time we were TAs, the teacher assistants. So we had a wide exposure to teaching, as well as tremendous financial advantage, because the tuition was being cut to half, and that made it affordable for us to go in and get it finished.
Yeah. How mentally demanding was this major for you? Because you went up to your master's, so I assume there were days when it was pretty hard.
Yes, no doubt about it. You ask anyone in the field of architecture, and they tell you there is a certain period of time you can do that study, and that is when you're young, because it is so demanding. I remember we had, I really, if I say 3/3 or 2/3 of the time, when you work in that field, when you're studying that field, it's so demanding that you only get three hours sleep at night, sometimes 4 hours, but after that you have to be up and running. Sometimes you do 48 hours in a row for the presentation, but that's the nature of it, and it's very demanding, very demanding. But the one thing that gives you the reward is the creative process. When you create something out of nothing, when you create something just by looking at the program, written words, and then you turn it into a structure, turn it into a space, and that space on your drawings becomes real. That there is no experience like that. It's a tremendously high experience. It gives you such a pleasure of looking at something and say, wow, despite of all the difficulties, I got it done. So no, it is very rewarding in that respect. It makes those hours that you spend without the sleep worthwhile.
Yeah, definitely. So throughout your educational path, whether it was beginning from Tehran University up until USC, were there some classes that you remembered that you liked and some that you disliked, but you still had to take them because of your major?
Yes, there were, obviously there are some classes um, related to, I think the design was the favorite, and is always is, because every design studio was 8 units. So you can tell, and every year we were on a semester system. So every semester you had one big design studio, which was 8 units. Then it moves into peripheral, courses. When I say peripheral, not to reduce their importance, but everyone was focusing on the design. So comes the history of architecture. I really like that. There were some courses on the technology. Some I like, some I dislike. Some of the items on energy calculations and all of that stuff, people are not, paying that much attention when their priorities on the design, and the subject is dry and cut. And it depends on how excited you become by the professors in terms of teaching it. Sometimes you wouldn't get that type of excitement that you would get from the design. So there were technology courses I didn't like. One of the things that I think all the people in the design field, when they are in the school, is the field, is the courses that are for the professional practice, which really that is the type of course when you do construction documents and working drawings. And a lot of time people would fall asleep in those courses. I'm telling you, it was no joke. We were sitting in the amphitheater or wherever it was that the course was being conducted. But that was such an important course because it would deal with your issues, has to do with the way you create the specifications, how you create the actual construction documents, what are the liabilities. And boy, no one had the ear for those things at all. Yeah. So everyone would pass with B or C and D. That was the level. But later on, when you come out, you realize, that was the key to the professional practice.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember last semester I took technical writing and communication, and oh my goodness, that
Yes.
I had to sit through that with all my strength.
Yes, it is. That's exactly what it was also for us because they would talk to you about how to write a specification. And oh my God, it's like, God, take me away.
Yeah. So, from my understanding, you graduated um, in 1987 from USC.
Yes, yes.
So I'm very curious to know as to how your major of architecture has advanced or changed since you graduated, and what were the good and bad things that did advance.
There are series of areas that changed substantially. One is the design and the approach to the design. There was a time that when we were in school, there was an era that modern architecture was starting to come back again versus the postmodern architecture, or as they say, super modern architecture was making a comeback. So there were buildings that were being built as a postmodern style with a lot of decorative elements and that sort of stuff. And then later on, those things started to dissipate and go away. And then we are back into the super modern structures. So in that respect, and I think super modern structure has persisted now um, since then, which I would say from end of the 1980s to present time. And it continues because simply the method of construction is economical and the cost is a big determining factor. The budgets are almost to the bone on every project. So therefore, the economical system of construction will help tremendously. So that was a huge part. Before we used to get buildings when I was in school at the time, we used to get buildings with a lot of decorative elements. And that's the postmodern architecture, where you had a lot of elements that could have been literally taken away from the buildings, but people would spend the money to have that. That type of a budget is no longer around, you know. And that was one of the areas. The second is the energy issues relevant to the energy. That even when we were in school, the issues relevant to the solar energy and sustainability and all that were still around. But we were coming out of the early 1970s at the time. And 1970s, early 1970s, you had this tremendous rush for use of solar energy and independence from fossil fuel and all of that. And then later on, that thing dissipated to the 80s. And again, this thing has come back. And now it has come back with even more solutions in terms of shaping the consumption of energy in the buildings. So, what we didn't have at the time was what we call today the smart building, where you have computerized energy management system, solar panels that would turn by the sun, by the computer to pick up the energy, and all of that. So those were the additional major changes that happened. Number three was the type of the building. In the 80s, we had a lot of commercial office space, a lot of office buildings, because the businesses were constantly moving around. They were coming in. There was a tremendous need for commercial uh, space for offices as well as retail. Now, almost 40 years later, regardless of the pandemics that we have gone through, many stuff are being done online. So therefore, now we have a glut of vacant office spaces, and we also have a glut of commercial retail spaces, which is going to determine now new course and a new direction into how we can convert these vacant spaces into something that can be occupied. For example, there is a lot of demand for housing. So what will be the new strategy in, recapturing those spaces but turn them into residential units? So there was a demand for residential before in the 80s that I was going to school, and then has always been there. But now we even have more of that, more of the demand for affordable housing, because housing prices, fluctuates, and right now everything is on the rise. And I hope it's not a bubble, a type of bubble that it bursts again and creates a huge wave of disruption into the construction and all other industries that is related to it. But I really do think that we are now looking at new directions as to renovate many existing structures that are left vacant and probably will never come back, because a lot of people now work from home. You're not going to have offices. I mean, there might be and there will be offices that you will have an entire floor or a couple of floors, but at the same time, there are offices that are now operating remotely through Zoom, through getting together maybe once a week. Even we ourselves in my office, we have relied on 10 to 15 people to as our team, and we work together to put these projects together. Most of them right now work with us remote, and we get together once a week through Zoom, or we meet face to face to go over issues and resolve the issues. So in that respect, even architectural offices have changed substantially in the way they operate.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I guess it was kind of different for me because my boyfriend is in manufacturing, so he only took like 3 business days off when the whole pandemic started. So, and then after that, he was just all in person because he's in manufacturing, so you need people there. So
Yes,
it was very
yes,
different. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, in my office, I was there all day. My business partner was there all day. But most of the people that we worked with, job captains and all of those, were able to do most of the stuff remotely. But we were present almost, as you said, maybe a day or two after. If you really own your own business, and everyone has said that, if you have your own business, you work harder than ever. It's not that you can really take off. It's not true. You really have to work. You have to really shore it up from every possible way. Marketing, doing the work, design work, all of that stuff is on your shoulder.
Yeah. Um What advice would you give to those going into the architecture field?
My advice to them is be dedicated, expect tremendous reward, but it will only come to you by hard work. This is one area that you cannot get shortcut. And the training is rigorous. The professors try to train you to develop a thick skin against criticism, because that is how public is. You know, your client, you might show the most spectacular design to someone and someone goes, you know, that's a letdown. So you have to have a pretty thick skin for those type of letdown, knowing a lot of clients just think aloud. They will tell you things, not that they purposely say so, that might disappoint you, but at the same time, they have trusted you with their money and they expect you to give them something that they like. So as a result of this, my first advice to everyone who is going to the architectural field, or the second advice, the first one is that there is a lot of hard work, you have to be dedicated. The second advice is that you have to be comfortable with compromise, because the only time you get what you want is that you give something. If you have a design completely under your control, which is the ideal situation, the client says, yeah, but I like this portion to be slightly different than that. So you need to work with them. It's a compromise. You are in a public service, your business. If you really want to be in the actual field of practice and practicing this field, you have to become comfortable with compromise. That doesn't mean that you do not argue against something that is against your design principles, but you have to make sure that you also respond to your client, because that is, as I said, put yourself in their place. You're spending 40, 50, $60,000 to get a design, and they have come to you and trusted you with that. You would like to like that design be also a reflective of the client. The client wants that. He wants to make sure that what they get, they like. So, as much as you, as the designer, would like to have 100% control over the design and these features, sometimes and many, many times, actually, you have to compromise. That's the second. So, I would say the second is to compromise. The first one was not to be afraid of a hard work. It is there, you have to do it. And number three is that your finances rises by you becoming more experienced. As you can say, many jobs at the earliest stages might not pay you that much, but it pay you. So you can, and that is the amount, the way you progress in your career, the more you get progress in your work, titles changes, puts you into a senior level. All of that depends on your discipline. The more responsibility you want to take, you can take. The less responsibility you want to take, you can take. But that creates a path for you to go forward or stay where you are. I have known fantastic architects who do not want to get into the project management because it's just too rigorous, and sometimes they feel it's going to disrupt the peace of their mind, which I fully understand. Therefore, they stay behind. They've done it willfully out of their own desire. No one has held them back. And then there are those that say, no, I want to really go forward. I want to get myself, down and dirty into this business and learn as much as I can, and I'm really ready to do it. So it really truly depends on you how you will assume more responsibility. Comes 5 o'clock, you don't have to leave the office. You can continue doing your work. You can prepare for tomorrow. So 9 to 5 work in this field is out of question. It's never a 9 to 5. And weekends, If you run your own business, you are your own boss, you will work during the weekend because you prepare stuff, you prepare invoices, you prepare all sorts of stuff. But then that is the reward of it. You're your own boss. So those three items, do not be afraid of the hard work in this field because it's a hard work. Two, really try to assume as much responsibilities as you can. And number three, you know, once again, it's not a 9 to 5 job.
Yeah.
It's a
So,
passion.
yeah, definitely.
For
Um,
me, like design was a passion. Truly, it was a passion, and it still is.
mhm.
And that passion fuels you to do things.
Yeah. So coming out of, I guess, your coming out of school and going into your very first job, what was that like now that you had a degree to your name? What was that like?
Yes. Oh, that was a hard job because when you are in the school, you're basically doing projects of you know certain magnitude, certain program. You basically run it from A to Z and put it together from A to Z. When you go to an office, depending on the size of the office you go to, they will not give you a project to design because you're new and they want to make sure your interface with the clients is not going to be as such that you might say or do something out of lack of experience that will alienate the client. That is very important for them. So for your first job, you probably will be just doing some of the technical work, drawings, preparing specifications, maybe taking your stuff to the building department to process, but you are not in charge of a project, period. Someone else has to lead it because believe me, if you don't have experience and you're suddenly let into that position, it really will be extremely difficult. And you will bumble your way through this truly badly out of everything. And you really get sick of yourself of doing so.
Yeah. Yeah, I do want to tell that to people who are watching because I think there are some people that are still out there that think, "Oh, I have a degree now, so I'm automatically an architect or I'm automatically an engineer." And it's just like, no, you have to work up to that point because all you've been in is school, and what the real world is like is completely different
Yes,
from what school is like. So
yes,
you're
it
going to
is.
start off at a very basic level until you earn that respect and you earn that experience to
Very
be that
much.
engineer. Yeah.
Very much so. It's it's the experience that is a bag mix of good stuff and bad stuff. You will make errors, you will make mistakes, you miss deadlines. All of that will add to your general overview. No one, no one comes into this business without making mistakes, especially in this field, architecture and construction. So it's a natural. And if you notice, this is a field that it builds up in you with experience. You have great artists, great musicians who are suddenly at the age of 3 or 4, they are doing what they are doing. Great music, paintings, all sorts of stuff. But you have never seen a architect at the age of 7 or at the age of 10. It's one field that, and in the very, very old days, they used to say it's an old man's profession. That was the expression about it. But it's not. It's not. But that means you have to have enough experience to weather the difficulties. And there are always things that shows up. One of the things about this field is that you never get bored. no two projects are alike. Even a single family home are never alike, depending on where you are, what site is, who your client is, what type of project, how many square foot is. You can have a 2,000 square foot home to do that can be in Malibu or it can be in Reseda. And the two nature of the two projects will be totally different from each other. The surrounding would be different. The soil would be different. So no two projects will ever be alike. So that is
Yeah.
one of the things that is so important to know about this field. But generally, your first 5 years in this business, as I know, as I saw it, as it went happened to me, you make errors and you have to sort of learn from it and move on. Everyone does it if you're coming to this. This is not something that you will find yourself um, just slide through the difficulty. You face it, your solution, you, you just have to come to terms with it, that no one will be able to succeed in this field without errors. Or as they used to say to us, you got to be called into the carpet many, many times before you get promoted. So it's like you have to show your scars to people to get you promoted. And that is because means you have to have sort of suffered through it or hurt through it and then say, all right, I'm going to pick up the pieces and move on to the next.
Yeah. So, throughout your working experience, how did you find your strengths?
Well, one of the things I did was that I realized doing the construction documents and working drawings, which basically means you put the documents together, which tells a builder how to build your product. It's different than your design process. The design document is different than your construction document. I realized the construction documents was one of the areas that would make you capable of doing the projects, building it, and detailing it the way you want it to be perceived by someone. Every line matters on the drawings for architecture. There is not a single line on any drawing that does not have a meaning on a drawing for architecture. So I decided that I will strengthen that field first, which was the construction documents, which was really the key to create your design and then be able to really detail it and probably try to get it through all the codes, all the construction issues, putting the subsystems in it, electricity, plumbing, and all of that. So in the first, I would say 10 years, I just strictly worked in jobs that I applied to and I went into that involved processing construction documents. I had equal opportunities to go to the design division because my design was very strong and I had the portfolio for it, but I did not. I wanted to make sure I'll go into first knowing the construction documents in its entirety and how the process is, how to get it processed, how to apply the codes, because the code are another major area that you need to be aware of when you're an architect. So that was my first. So at the time that I started my career, my strength was in the design and less in the construction documents. So I decided to strengthen that first. And with that in mind, I went in until I was director of production 15 years later and handled the construction administration. And also I wanted to know the construction because through the construction document, you do construction administration. And then I went back to the design, into the senior designer positions and everything else, even though it was difficult, but I had the portfolio and the work to show that I could do it. So it all again depends on you. Some some people do not want to explore their own weaknesses because they feel it might be just too anticlimactic, as they say, because you face difficulties and you have to sort of deal with it on a day by day. Why make your day bad when you can have a good day when you're doing the stuff that you're strong at? But I sort of took the other way because I did not want to have weakness in the construction document and construction side of it, which the first 5 years was difficult because, you tell yourself, why am I doing this? Instead of having a good time, trying to do something that I'm good at it all the time. But that was the way I choose to do. And I benefited from it. You cannot really have an office on your own if you do not know all aspects of your profession. Right now, if a guy, for whatever reason, in the office is sick or cannot come in, or there are issues, he cannot be there, I know how to do their job from the very junior level all the way to where I'm principal. So you got to be able to do that. You got to be able to also provide direction, which are meaningful, and you can help other grow in their jobs. You have a responsibility to be able to give right advice to the people who are working with you in your projects, your project team, because they have aspirations as much as you did. And you have to provide them with the right advice, correct advice, and that is not possible without experience. So, as a principal in a firm in this field, you not only are responsible for the project that you're handling and your client, but also you have a tremendous responsibility toward the people who are working with you because they are you 15 years earlier or 20 years earlier, and they are trying to go where you have gone. So you have to be able to support them. You have to be able to give them correct advice. And that correct advice does not come without experience.
Yeah. So obviously with many of these fields, teamwork is a very important aspect as well.
Yes,
So how important is teamwork in the line of architecture?
tremendously, tremendously. Um, Design, in many occasions, when you have a design and a design team, the principal comes up with the general concept of what has to be done and then works with others who are producing that drawing and work on it all the time to get it refined. So sometimes this process is singular. Like on my case, I specifically try to design everything to the way I like, and I try to figure out all the details. In the construction document phase, it will be impossible. There is so much work to be done. It's not a singular activity. You have to have three, four people working on the construction document phase, starting from a job captain to senior draftsperson to medium, intermediate. All of those guys have to come together in order to get something done. And you need to review the work. You are responsible, as the senior person in that office, are responsible to review everything, give feedback. So that is the one of the very interesting parts. You have to be able to not only function singularly, but you have to be able to work within a team in a field of architecture. Because, as I said, imagine, and I've said that many times in the classes, and I'm sure you have had that when I said that. When you look at the hospital construction documents, that's over 1,000 pages, 1,000 sheets of drawings, which it cannot be produced by one person. It has to be produced by several, but they all have to be in sync, which means that they have to be coordinated. There has to be a clear communication between people. And in that respect, it's very important that you be able to work within that team. The team sometimes You are a leader in the team, sometimes you're a follower. So in both roles, you have to be able to function because someone is telling you that this has to be done this way and only this way for that particular project because of the restriction. So you need to follow that. So in a sense, as they say, you can't become a general if you haven't been a soldier. It's the same thing in the team environment. You have to be able to work with everyone before you get to that level that you want to be on the senior level. Very important in this field.
Yeah. So with, the good comes the bad.
Yes.
So while you were working, what was a big mistake that you made while at work, and how did you bounce back from it? And do you have any advice to those who have made mistakes at work, and how to bounce back from it? Because with these STEM fields, even in NASA, you make one mistake and there goes $1 million or $5 million, and
Yes.
it can be quite heavy on a few people who made that mistake. So
Yes. Yes. I remember one of the mistakes that I made on an early part when I was developing the Windows schedule for a house. I paid just because of my own, lack of knowledge on certain areas. I made the windows. I did not pay any attention to the manufacturer's rough opening for the size of the windows. So I was so afraid that the windows won't fit that I made them smaller. It almost had an inch of gap from the rough opening. So when the windows came in, everyone was upset. It's like, why are these windows much smaller than these rough openings? And I'm like looking at the around going,
yeah.
and it's like, not me. Well, that was a harsh experience because you should have seen the face of the contractor. The guy was about to tear me apart right at the field. And I'm going like, oh yeah, sorry man, I don't know what to do. But that was something that I tell you, I think it really took me a couple of months to get it out of my head, because it added a cost of about 10 grand to the job to fair up around the windows and everything else. And the good thing about it was that the owner knew me and the owner liked my work. But I tell you, he made sure I know that he was pissed about what has happened on his windows. So it's one of those that I mean, even to this day, I'm going, oh my god, what a horror that was. So no, it stays with you. You learn from it because the next time I not only did check everything, but I also gave it to someone else to check. Again, once one of those things happens that, okay, you better be sure about something like this, which can generate a costly change order. But like anything else, time heals. And the more time passes, you feel more comfortable with it and then you learn from it. That's the only way, you know.
Yeah. So one last question before we go.
Yes.
Um, so anyone who majors in anything contributes to society in a different way, whether they're a nurse or a software engineer. How do you feel like you have contributed to society with an architecture degree?
I think that, when we look at architecture, it's as an architect, you create a built environment. And the built environment has to have positive qualities in order for people to also enjoy it and be able to live in it and be able to experience life. Um, Churchill used to say that We shape our buildings, and then the building shapes us. And that is very true. A good environment, a good built environment, whether it is a home, whether it's a school, whether it is an office, whether it's a retail, doesn't matter. It inspires good feelings, and good feelings create positivity. A good architecture always creates positive, always creates an aura of satisfaction, which in turn inspires people to be doing good. Their energy becomes good. The built environment has a tremendous impact on our behavior. That's why they completely connect the built environment with the behavioral environment. You put people in a terrible environment, the result of the people is negativity. You put them into a good environment, the people think positively. So, as an architect, you contribute tremendously, whether you are dealing with a single family home, or you're dealing with a school, or you're dealing with a stadium. A good environment creates good vibes, good good feelings, and makes people comfortable and makes people happy. It makes them. It might not be just the issue of, but when they are there, they feel good in a good environment. And I think that is the biggest contribution architecture has done.
Yeah. Well, Professor, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh,
And
my pleasure.
it was very nice interviewing you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.